Hello and welcome to the Ruth McFit podcast. I'm very, very happy to be here with you today. First podcast of 2026. And I hope you've had a fantastic start to the year. Now, I wanted to record this episode because even though fat loss often gets talked about as the goal, it's very rarely the only goal. You probably don't just want to lose weight, if of course you do want to lose weight. You don't just want a smaller body. You also want to feel good. You want more energy. You want confidence. You want to enjoy your food, your movement, your work, family, and social life without feeling like you're constantly on a diet or like you're having to put everything else on hold. It might be that you've even caught yourself saying things like, I don't actually want my whole life to revolve around this, or I just want to feel healthier without feeling like I'm always trying to be good. And this is where things can start to feel a bit tricky because so many fat loss approaches quietly expect you to behave as if this goal exists in isolation. It exists on its own. And it's as if it doesn't overlap with the rest of your life. As if you can just switch everything else off for a few weeks, focus purely on weight loss, and then return to normal afterwards. But you know that the real world doesn't really work like that, does it? This isn't how real life looks. Your work isn't going to pause. Your family definitely doesn't pause. Your stress levels don't pause, and those responsibilities are still going to be there. So when a plan ignores all of that, it might look sensible on paper, but very quickly it starts to feel heavy and hard to sustain. We're not talking here about finding a faster way to lose weight, although it often ends up being quicker long term. It's definitely not about pushing harder or being stricter or trying to summon more discipline. It's about understanding why so many well-intentioned plans fall apart, even when they seem quite reasonable. And then what actually helps you keep moving forward without giving up on the things that you actually enjoy. Balance is a word that gets used a lot. I spoke about it in my last podcast episode where I spoke about the ripple effect, but it's often misunderstood because balance doesn't mean doing everything perfectly. It doesn't mean that we're going to be able to give equal amount of energy to all areas of your life all the time. That is definitely not realistic. In fact, years ago, I remember watching a TED talk and it had a head teacher on it. And he was talking about how he used to take his work home. It was kind of all consuming. And then one day he just decided to do enough. He just decided to do what actually absolutely had to be done and not go above and beyond. And nobody noticed that change. And he was able to then put energy into the other things that were important to him. In his case, his son, his family. And it stuck with me that it is just doing enough often. And balance is about being able to adapt and adjust without completely taking your eye off what matters to you. And if we don't have balance as part of the picture, then flexibility is usually the first thing that just disappears. Recently, one of my members was asking if she could write her other goals inside the app alongside her health and fitness goals. And on paper, these things had nothing to do with health and fitness or fat loss. But I was like, yes, please, absolutely write them down because none of our goals exist in isolation. When you feel better in one area, it tends to spill over into others. When we feel calmer or more supported and less restricted, everything else feels easier to manage. So in this episode, I want to talk about why flexibility is so often the missing piece in fat loss, especially for women who are in their and beyond. And I don't mean flexibility as in anything goes, but instead flexibility that allows you to keep moving forward while still enjoying your life. Because the goal isn't just to reach an outcome. We want to feel good while we're getting there. And once we start talking about balance and life, it's worth actually looking at what most fat loss plans are asking you to do. And why you can look at them and think, yes, I should definitely be able to do this. This will fit. There's no excuses. Because on the surface, a lot of plans do look very reasonable. Train a bit more, eat a bit less, be more organized with food, move your body more day to day. I mean, I would definitely be encouraging people to do those things. And if you look at them on their own, it's very easy to think that there's no reason you can't do them. And on plenty of days, you probably can. None of these things sound extreme when you isolate them. The problem is that you rarely experience them in isolation. What usually happens is something that I'm going to call a stacking effect. You're not swapping things out, you're just adding things in. You'll add in those extra workouts on top of a very busy week. You add in a calorie deficit alongside work, family, mental load that you're already carrying. You add meal prep on top of cooking for other people. You feel like you've got to do that separately. You add more steps, more tracking, more thinking about health, fitness, fat loss. And all of this is happening while you're still trying to do everything else that you were doing before. And that's before we even think about factoring in weekends away, social plans, broken sleep, stressful periods of work, all those weeks where life just feels harder than normal. I think we all know those weeks. And on paper, those plans do still look doable. But in real life, it can start to feel relentless. Now, if you're already dealing with decision fatigue, and a lot of women are, especially at this age, very structured plans suddenly become incredibly tempting. So here we're thinking plans like Slimming World, for example. And the reason I've chosen Slimming World as an example is nearly 16 years ago, I did sign up to Slimming World after having my eldest, who's going to be 16 tomorrow, by the way. And so I know a little bit more about how it works. But you can apply the same to all the other examples that are out there, where you're not tracking calories, you're told what's allowed and what's off limits. There's this clear framework, and this makes the decision-making feel easier, feel lighter. If you're tired, busy, and mentally overloaded, as I was after having my eldest, this structure can feel like quite a relief. It takes some of the thinking away. You don't have to weigh up every choice. You just follow the rules. And in many cases, people are going to end up in a deficit, often without realizing it because the plan is designed in that way. So I want to be very clear about this, that if you've ever been drawn to an approach like that, there's nothing wrong with you. Wanting structure doesn't mean that you're weak or lazy. Most of the time, it just means you're overwhelmed and craving some clarity. The problems usually show up later. Most people don't follow these plans long term. I don't know anyone, in fact, who's followed things like Slimming World, Weight Watchers, Slim Fast, or similar for life. Eventually, real life does catch up. And when a plan relies on rigid categories like points or sins, the moment you step outside of those rules, it really can feel like you've messed everything up. And that's where this all or nothing thinking starts to creep in. So while the plans offer structure, they don't always teach the skills. They don't help you learn how to make decisions when the plan isn't there. And they don't support flexibility when life doesn't really neatly fit into those rules. And it is decision fatigue that's happening underneath all of this. You're probably not looking for the perfect plan. You're looking for someone to tell you what to do, because making constant decisions about food, movement, and health on top of everything else just feels exhausting. And it makes complete sense. But outsourcing all of your decision making definitely isn't going to help you in the long run, I'm sorry to say, because eventually when the plan ends or you get fed up with doing it and you stop following it, you're left without that confidence to be able to adapt. And that's why most people don't fail through lack of effort. They struggle because the approach was never designed to work alongside a real and very changeable life. And this is exactly where flexibility comes in, not as a lack of structure, let's be clear on that, but as a smarter kind of structure, one that's going to support progress without asking everything else in your life to shrink to make room for it. Once we start to understand what fat loss plans are actually asking of us, the next question becomes where those expectations are coming from in the first place. Because I don't think you wake up one day and decide that fat loss should be extreme, rigid, and all-consuming. Those ideas have kind of seeped in slowly over time. I actually spent a bit of time yesterday Googling different trends around weight loss and fat loss and seeing what people were asking on Google. And what came up again and again were not questions about sustainability and feeling good long term, which didn't surprise me, unfortunately. They were about speed, how to lose a certain amount of weight in a week, in 2 weeks, in a month, sometimes even a day. Very rarely do people search for how to lose weight in a way that feels good 6 months from now, or how to lose weight in a way that feels good while you're doing it. When we're surrounded by this messaging around speed, it's really no surprise that you would start with this quiet belief in the background that progress should be fast and obvious, that those big wins should happen very quickly. And then when they don't, you assume that you're doing something wrong, or we're looking at measurements that fluctuate like scale weight and expecting them to go down in this nice, even way. And we take this expectation with us when we sign up for one of these plans. Even if the plan itself looks reasonable, there's usually an unspoken assumption that it's going to need this really big push, that it's going to feel quite hard, that you just have to get through this bit. And this is where things can really start to unravel for a lot of women, because those expectations rarely match the reality of life. When I look back at my life 16 years ago, there was this big shift that happened because I started working as a teacher. Then I had my first child, Hector. And the shift that happened wasn't because any of these things were a problem on their own, of course, but because of what I didn't change alongside them. I wasn't going to let anything else go. So my work had become more demanding. I had a baby and a child who needed more from me. My time was tighter and my energy was more stretched because of sleep and so on. But I expected to keep everything else exactly the same. And I carried on trying to do all the things I'd done before, just with a bit more layered on top. And it did feel manageable for quite a while. Now, when you're younger, you can often get away with that, I think. You tolerate busy weekends, you push through tiredness, you tell yourself you're fine, or you think there's something wrong with you. I'd often think when I was tired that there was something wrong with me. And I think the tricky part here is that these things happen gradually. We add a little bit more responsibility here, a little bit more pressure there, another role, another expectation. And because each change on its own doesn't feel particularly dramatic, you don't always notice the load building. You just keep on going. And over time, cumulative load really does start to matter. This is where fat loss plans that rely on doing more and more begin to feel out of sync with life. It's not that you suddenly lose motivation or discipline. It's that your context has changed, but your expectations have not. Our life is fuller at this stage of life. More people likely rely on you. You've got more mental load, often more stress. Hormones, dare I mention them, are changing. And there's less space to recover when things are feeling quite intense. And yet, we often still do approach fat loss as if we have the same capacity that we had years ago, with the same margin for error. And this is why flexibility is going to matter even more, not because you are less capable. I would say or argue that women at this stage of life are some of the most capable people I know. Instead, it's that our life has changed. And long-term weight management research is consistently showing that success is far more strongly linked to adherence than intensity. In other words, what matters most isn't how hard you push, but how well the approach fits into your actual life as well, not someone else's, yours. It's about finding something that you can do long-term without it feeling like a chore. Routine and structure work best when they genuinely are easy for you. And I want to give an example here that isn't so much linked to fat loss, but it's like my husband's gym routine. He had struggled to be consistent for the gym for a long, long time until he realized that he could get into this routine where it was easy to do. So he drops my son at the bus stop every morning and he almost drives past the gym when he's doing that. So he started dropping my son at the bus stop and going to the gym and not expecting himself to be in there for a long time. It's working so well for him because he's doing it as part of his routine. It doesn't feel like a chore. It fits in with life very easily. And there's actually someone called Eric Helms who's written extensively about flexible dieting and sustainability. And what he found is that approaches that allow adjustment and personalization tend to be maintained for longer than those rigid one-size-fits-all plans. But culturally, we're still very attached to the idea that faster is better or stricter is better and harder must be more effective. But actually, what we see again and again is that people following these flexible approaches are still getting fantastic results in a good time frame. I think it's this looking at it a day at a time, a week at a time, and then feeling like we need to push really hard all the time to get those results. Maybe the biggest loser is in part responsible for that mindset. I don't know, that people are expecting these big losses day on day, week on week, and that isn't how it works. But having that belief that we need to push hard all the time and get these very quick, dramatic results, I think nudges us towards plans that can look very impressive on paper, but don't fit with the reality of life, with our energy and with responsibilities that you have. And when expectations don't match the context we're in, flexibility isn't optional. It's essential. We need this approach. And this is where flexibility can often get misunderstood because it's usually talked about in very vague terms. People hear flexibility and assume it means being relaxed or casual, almost like a softer option for when you're not disciplined enough to do it the other way. But that's not what flexibility actually looks like in real life. Real flexibility is decision-making. It's making choices rather than reactions. It's awareness. It's responding to what's happening around you rather than forcing yourself to stick to a plan that is no longer working for the day that you're having. And usually you see this most clearly on those days where things don't go to plan. I think we all know the ones. You've barely slept, you wake up already tired, your brain feels foggy, your body feels heavy. And then our plan says, this is what you've got to do today. And this was me yesterday. I have a routine that works really well for me. You know, on paper, it's solid. Certain days are strength training, certain days are run days. It feels balanced, it's realistic. And when sleep and recovery are good, I feel great. But recently, my sleep has been off. I have been waking in the night. I think this might be to do with the fact that I had my Marina coil changed, because I was blaming Christmas, but then I realized I had it changed just before Christmas and now it's not settled back down. Maybe there's a bit of a hormonal thing going on, but I've been waking in the night, which isn't usual for me. And it's left me so tired during the day. And yesterday was a particularly bad day where I really didn't feel like I'd slept much at all. And yesterday was meant to be a run day. And often I'll just go out and I'll go a bit slower. And the temptation was to just carry on as normal, to push through, because it is my routine. And it feels like, I guess, that that's what consistency looks like. But I did also know that going out for a run wasn't going to be supporting me. It wasn't going to be making me feel better, which some of you may know is always my goal, to come back feeling better than I did when I went out. It wasn't going to be helping my recovery. It was just forcing myself to tick a box. So I decided to walk instead. And this wasn't me quitting or losing motivation. This was just me adjusting. And this is the really important part, you see, because flexibility isn't about reacting emotionally. It's about making an intentional choice. And don't get me wrong, in the past, I've done the opposite. You know, when I've had back niggles, I've tried to push on because of what the plan said. Or when I've been following running programs in the past, I would do exactly what it said on the program, even if it was leaving me feeling drained, and then the cycle would just continue. And that was just delaying my recovery. And it was turning training into something I had to really endure rather than something that felt supportive to me. And that's not resilience and keeping on going. That's stubbornness, I think. And this is what we see when flexibility isn't built in. You either force yourselves through sessions that don't feel right, or you avoid them altogether because the plan feels too hard for the day that you're having. And neither of these options supports consistency. And it's why I've changed how I program and coach. I stopped assuming that one plan would fit everyone. I stopped assuming that what was optimal on paper would always be the best choice in reality. And instead I built options, because what is actually optimal is what you can do consistently. So I've got different workout formats now, shorter sessions, things for low effort days, strength, mobility, gentle movement. In fact, one of my members was saying that she really likes one of the workouts in the app because it uses timing and she doesn't have to count reps. It's little things like that that can make a big difference. It's not so you can avoid effort, but so you can do something rather than nothing. And sometimes that something is actually rest. Rest is not failing. Rest is absolutely part of the process. Adjusting is not quitting, and choosing recovery when your body needs it is absolutely progress. And that's where flexibility actually protects consistency. Because when you feel that you're allowed to adapt without feeling like you've messed up, you're far more likely to keep showing up over the long term. Studies on behavior change show that rigid rules increase the all or nothing thinking, whereas the flexible approaches support better adherence and fewer cycles of stopping and starting. In simple terms, when you don't feel like you failed the moment something changes, weirdly, you stay engaged. And again, flexibility isn't about lowering standards. It's about choosing standards that work in your life, in real life. And this is where flexibility starts to show itself in a very practical, everyday way. One of the clearest examples of this is why I use calorie ranges rather than a single target. A single number sounds very simple, but what it quietly creates, whether you notice it or not, is a pass or fail system. You hit the number and you've done well, you miss it and suddenly you feel off track. This is definitely how I used to feel. And some people might say this is motivating, that if they've got that lower number there, then they always know that's what they want to aim for. But in real life, bodies and days don't work in straight lines. Our appetite isn't static, our energy isn't static, our hunger isn't static, and neither are our days. No one day is going to be the same. Some days you genuinely feel like you need more food. Some days you do need less. Some days you're more social. Some days you're sitting down most of the day. Some days you're feeling really stressed, you've underslept, or you're mentally drained. And a single target doesn't account for any of that, but a range does. which is why I now use them. A range is going to allow you to respond to what's actually happening without feeling like you've abandoned the goal altogether. You're still within a structure, but it's a structure that is going to move with life rather than falling apart the moment something changes. This is also where tracking often gets misunderstood. Tracking is a brilliant tool because it builds awareness, it teaches us portion sizes, it helps you notice patterns in your eating that maybe you haven't seen before. But in many cases, I'm going to say most cases, tracking is an optimal option. Tracking isn't the overall goal. There will be times when tracking doesn't feel realistic. You're on holidays, busy periods at work, family events, weekends away, or just where you don't have that mental headspace for it. And this is where the flexibility really matters again, because this is where most people either adapt to that situation or just spiral. When tracking stops and we've got nothing there underneath, that's when our bucket response can really show up. You just stop tracking. You stop caring. I'm not tracking. It doesn't matter. You think, well, I've messed up now. So what's the point? I'm going to start again on Monday. And again, it's not a willpower thing. It's about the structure underneath the structure that we have. And we can talk about this in layers. If tracking isn't happening, what is still there? Maybe it's having protein and veg at your meals. Maybe it's keeping to regular meal times. Maybe it's having a set breakfast each go. I know that's what a member was sharing that helped her over Christmas. Maybe it's being intentional with portions, even if you're not using those numbers. Maybe it's still choosing foods that support how you want to feel. Often people have tracked for a fair amount of time and have a good knowledge of what's in their meals. It's just that when we're not tracking, we stop thinking about everything. But having these layers really matters because it stops one change from turning into this complete derailment. Those of you who allow variation and adjustment will experience less guilt around food, fewer cycles of restriction and overeating, and better long-term adherence. That's not just me saying that. That is supported by research. This is why I'll often talk about a weekly average rather than seeing it as a day-to-day goal. One higher day is not going to undo your progress. One meal does not ruin anything. One weekend away isn't going to erase weeks of consistent effort. Fat loss isn't going to be built on individual moments. It's built on patterns over time. And then when we give ourselves that flexibility and that structure, those patterns can continue even when conditions do change. And that is what's going to keep you moving forward instead of constantly starting again, which so many of you are fed up of doing. And I think even consistency is one of the most misunderstood ideas in fat loss. Consistency is not doing everything right all the time. It's not hitting the same numbers every single day. I've been really consistent because I've done it every day. I mean, that is consistent, but it isn't what it is. It isn't following a plan perfectly week after week without interruption. It comes back to those supportive habits and doing those again and again. The majority of the time, it's being able to zoom out and look at the bigger picture instead of getting stuck on those individual days, those individual meals, or those moments. If flexibility means adapting occasionally so you can stay consistent overall, that is going to support your progress. However, if flexibility turns into extremes every weekend followed by restriction during the week, that isn't flexibility. That's just a cycle that you're in, overeating, undereating. And this distinction does matter. This is often where scarcity mindset seeks in without you even realizing it. Because when foods feel off limits, they gain power. And when flexibility isn't built in, we start feeling like we can't have those things. We put them off. And then when we do have them, we overeat them, or we feel like we failed the moment we step outside those rules. But when flexibility exists, food becomes much more neutral. Now, cake is just cake, although I would normally say no crap cake because life's too short for crap cake. But it is just a piece of cake. It hasn't ruined anything. A meal is just a meal out, and a higher day is just a higher day. And because of that, your decisions start to feel calmer. Actually, one of the members on our monthly call, which was at the beginning of this week, was saying that this is the first new year where she's felt genuinely calm and not frantic. It's not like she's chasing a number or joining a hard challenge or bracing herself for a hard few weeks ahead, because she doesn't worry now about cutting things out or making up for Christmas. She has allowed herself to not be perfect, and she's back into routine and feeling calm with that choice. She's making choices and not reactions, and it feels so good. And this is what consistency looks like. It's definitely not adding pressure and white knuckling your way through. It's just trust. Trusting what you do most of the time more than what you do occasionally. trusting that you don't have to overcorrect every time something isn't perfect, trusting that the process is going to come from patterns and not punishment. When flexibility is built into the process, you're not going to panic as much. You don't feel like you've ruined everything, and you don't feel like you need to start again on Monday. You just carry on. And that's why flexibility isn't something you add once things go wrong, and instead make it something that you have from the start. There will be days where you can push and get all of the things you want to do done, but we need a backup option for those days that are harder. We often talk about this in our community as having the goals, the things that we can manage absolutely without fail. And then we have stretch goals. So we'll have like an A and a B. And these are things that we can always do, even if we're feeling a bit rubbish. And the others are things that we will always strive to do the majority of the time if we can. But we always know that we've got a backup plan, because consistency isn't going to come from doing more. It's going to come from doing what you can repeat. Flexibility is what makes repeatability possible. And as always, if this podcast episode resonated with you, then I would love you to subscribe, to comment and let me know your thoughts. And if you could let others know about the podcast as well. And if you're interested in knowing your calorie range, then I'm going to put a link in the show notes that will take you to a form to fill in, where you will then get your calorie range calculated. And then you know that anywhere in the middle of that range is still going to have you in a deficit. You can look at it as an average over the week with no big highs or big lows. Until next time, thank you so much. Goodbye.